Now, one of the questions I get asked most often is, if in some hypothetical reality I was given full control of Star Wars, what exactly would I do with it? If Disney called me up tomorrow and was like, hey Thor, what do you think we should do with Star Wars? It's not going as well as we had hoped for when we bought it a decade ago, and we want you, of all people for reasons, to tell us what to do to make it the best and most profitable it can be. And for the record, if this did somehow happen, which I'm not saying it would or ever should, but if it did happen, I would keep that in mind. I would keep in mind that, like it or not, Star Wars is a business, essentially. It is something that needs to make money to survive. I couldn't or wouldn't just be like, I'd make every project hardcore fans have always wanted or dreamed of, or that I personally have ever dreamed of, because, well, that's honestly probably not the best approach. Though that said, I do think that, yeah, you want to make sure that you take care of your most loyal and devoted fans, aka your most loyal and devoted customers. Sure, they may be outnumbered by the more casual fan or the average viewer, but their passion is the heart and soul of the franchise, and yes, they would get more love under my rule. However, with my first act with this new authority, I would assemble a team led by me that created a whole new era of Star Wars set in the far, far future, set thousands of years after the events of the Skywalker saga. One that acted as almost like a new starting point for the franchise, or maybe I should say a jumping on point, that could or would be something new and old fans alike could basically kind of discover together. Something that didn't rely very heavily on everything we knew about Star Wars, but that also, yeah, felt like Star Wars still. And so it really would be something new and different, something that shakes up the very landscape of the galaxy itself and gives us an opportunity for some really different types of stories to be told, all the while, of course, keeping the heart and soul of Star Wars intact. I'm not talking about changing the meaning of Star Wars or radically changing what it's all about. I'm just talking about basically doing something that some might think is, yeah, maybe it's a little much, maybe it's a little crazy even, and I'll get into some details on it in a bit what I would do, but it would be something that lets the galaxy, this setting, have a somewhat different feel to it, but not so different that it doesn't, again, feel like Star Wars anymore. It'd be more than just a fresh coat of paint like you could say the sequels were, but not so radically different it feels like we're suddenly in a whole other franchise. Along with this, I would immediately cancel pretty much every project they've got going on right now, other than the Mandoverse stuff. I think you need to see that through at this point. They're so heavily vested in it, you do have a lot of fans of it, and I do think it is more than salvageable, shall we say. But I do think you finish that off, if you will. You kind of complete the story of Thrawn, essentially, since he seems to be the big bad villain of this time. And I would also release anything that is basically already finished, like Skeleton Crew, and certainly Andor Season 2 would still happen. But anything like the Rey movie or the Dawn of the Jedi movie, anything else really I would just bring to a halt to focus on the new era and starting a whole new trilogy and maybe a whole new saga, really, of multiple trilogies depending on just how well it went. While, again, also finishing off that Mandoverse time period, finishing off the Thrawn storyline, which would now have a bit more to do with the Chiss ascendancy going forward for reasons I'll get into soon enough. And no, I'm not saying I would completely abandon the Skywalker saga era forever. I'd actually keep most of the new books and comics that are coming out. I'd keep them in that time period, and with there being no plans for future movies or shows set anywhere near the Skywalker time period, it would, shall we say, give them a bit more freedom, or a lot more freedom, with the stories in the books and comics, instead of them mainly being kind of boring supplementary material, ones that have little to no bearing on really anything, and that get retconned on a whim by shows and movies. I would allow them to, much like the EU once did, to be kind of the main story of the time period again. I'd have it where the books and comics are, where the big events are happening again. And speaking of the EU, along with this, I would see no reason not to sort of restart it. I'm not saying we suddenly get flooded with books and comics from it, but we could certainly have a few here and there. I would have both of these timelines running, and though some might not like this idea, and I would understand why, but I wouldn't specifically say which one is the actual official version of events. The new stuff we would be making, again set far in the future, thousands of years in the future, would be so far removed from this that, in a manner of speaking, it wouldn't technically matter which one was the official canon and which one wasn't. Either or could be, depending on how you want to view it, which one you want it to be. If you are a big fan of the EU, that is canon. If you're a big fan of the new Disney canon, well, that's your canon. Though that said, in the new era stuff, I would be very careful with how the canon was handled. I would promise a consistent canon, like they did when they canceled the EU and said they were making a new one. But I would keep that promise. I would have very few books and comics printed in this new era. Again, they would mainly be EU stuff and old school Disney canon in the Skywalker saga time period. And when new ones in the new era were printed, they would tie into what is actually going on and have some real meaning. Not so much that they were required reading, if you will, but enough meaning that you felt like they were truly part of the bigger story and they were worth your time. And I'm also not saying here that I would never ever again have a show or a movie or animated series that would be set in the, let's keep calling it, Skywalker era. But the main focus, the movies and most shows going forward, once the Mandoverse and Thrawn stuff was done, would be set in this new era. I would go all in on this idea, and in all honesty, I do think this is actually what Disney should consider doing. I do think they need to find a way to make Star Wars their own, if you will, to do something original with it, instead of always tiptoeing around the Skywalker era stuff or trampling all over it sometimes and transforming it or recontextualizing what already exists and angering a lot of the fans in the process. And you could argue they already tried to do something like this with the High Republic era, but going back in time and creating something that, honestly, not much can really happen in it, because it has to, or should try to, align with what comes a few hundred years later in the prequels, I don't think that is really creating a new era of Star Wars. They call it one, and it kind of is one to a degree, but it isn't really doing anything different or new. It is just going back in time and kind of filling in a blank of a time period that, quite honestly, I don't think anybody really asked for. I think we've always assumed, and even Lucas has said, the previous 1,000 years has been a time of relative peace and prosperity in the Republic under the protection of the Jedi Order. And the same kind of applies with going back and doing something set in the old Republic era. Yes, there are thousands of years to explore there. They could pick a period of time and make it their own and tell unique stories. But I honestly think they'd be better off just going into the future and not running the risk of, shall we say, damaging any of the old stuff anymore. Not to mention, like I was kind of just saying, it's really time to stop going back and filling in blanks. It's time to move forward, to really move forward, to actually do something new and different with Star Wars. And so, kind of moving on to the basic idea I had for this new time period or era, well, again, it would be set a couple thousand years in the future. I don't know exactly how many just yet. But I would have some sort of a truly catastrophic event that took place. One that literally changes the very landscape of the galaxy and, to a degree, maybe even kind of changes the Force itself. I would have it where, at some point again in the far future, a powerful dark side user comes along, and this again is all kind of a work in progress. And I'd love to literally write this story if I wouldn't be sued into oblivion by Lucasfilm. But I'd have a Darksider come along that, in a manner of speaking, tries to become the Force itself, that has become that strong and that powerful, that they are now truly going to become the ultimate form of selfishness and want to control virtually everything, to become a god, essentially. And this Darksider tries to, again, sort of embody or take over the Force itself in order to transform the galaxy into what they think it should be. But the Jedi, basically the entire order at the time, in the ultimate selfless sacrifice, they go and manage to stop him. But there is again a major catastrophe that, as far as we know, destroys the very planet this fight takes place on, and kills the Darksider and all the Jedi as well. And there's then also this sort of explosion, or more accurately, a sort of event within the Force itself, essentially. A reaction from it that ripples across the entire galaxy and causes absolute chaos in numerous ways, including destroying, or so people think, but destroying the dimension known as hyperspace, which means no hyperspace travel, at least for a time, which will have, of course, it'll have dire ramifications for the entire galaxy and for its people. The Chiss Ascendancy then, who, as I said before, would get explored a bit in the Mandoverse so that people were kind of introduced to them first. They would, with the help of their Skywalkers, which are Force-sensitive kids that can navigate what is called the chaos in that region of space. Hyperspace there was kind of messed up, shall we say, or to put it very simply. But the Chiss will be the first to discover a new form of hyperspace travel, or to access the old hyperspace, which will allow them to quickly begin to take over the entire galaxy. And yeah, a little something like that has been done before. And this is more or less where I would start, with the Chiss really starting to branch out. I would start in the sort of middle of the story like George Lucas once did, leaving open the possibility to go back and tell the story of the Darksider's rise to power, and how he tried to take over the galaxy and caused all the chaos. But the first movie, the trilogy, I should say, would be set after all that. It would be set maybe some 50 years after the event that had decimated the galaxy and basically isolated all of the systems of the galaxy. The Republic, of course, would be long gone at this point, and there are, or would quickly form as hyperspace is rediscovered, there would quickly form many different factions, and we would, of course, have a criminal faction be one of the first to discover it so that they could start spreading across the galaxy. Maybe the Hutts, maybe the Pikes, maybe Black Sun, I don't know, maybe something completely new. The Jedi, too, as far as anyone knew anyway, would be gone, and there would be many different beliefs or theories about what had actually happened to them or what had caused the catastrophe in the first place. Again, with everybody isolated, most in the galaxy wouldn't even know why any of this had happened, what had been the precursor to it. There would also be those who knew what had happened who would wonder if maybe this Darksider hadn't been stopped, and if this is what he had actually created, or if he had been successful. But anyway, that is again my very basic idea. That would be my starting point and how I would start to begin a new era of Star Wars. A sort of jumping on point for everybody. That everybody is kind of on an even playing field, that nobody really knows all of this lore that is going to be vitally important. Yes, knowing Star Wars itself might give you clues as to where this is going and what might happen, because, as I said, I'm going to keep kind of the same themes, including the main one kind of being symbiotic circles like Lucas would have done. The whole idea here is that the galaxy is shattered, and that is when they finally realize how much they relied on each other. Sometimes you can't figure out just how important someone is until they are taken away from you, or how important anything is until it is taken away. And so again, the main idea here is something fresh and new, something that allows us to see why people need each other in the galaxy and why the Republic was good. And of course, the Jedi and this dark side threat would play a big part in it as well. But anyway, for now, that is all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to tell me what you think about any or all of this. What do you think about my plan for Lucasfilm, or what would your plan be? If you were given the presidency of Lucasfilm and told by Disney you could do virtually whatever you wanted, what would you do with Star Wars? Whatever the case may be, though, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.